So I have a brief review. That way Diane kind of gets caught up on what we did in part 1. So we'll start with that. And then Kim, did you prepare some ideas? If not, I have plenty.
I have a very basic set of ideas. Like I have 1 challenge, 3 choices, and I'm working on consequences.
We can work through it, and then that way, you know, we can go through the whole process together. So Diane kind of knows what we're talking about. With Choose Your Own Adventure, we talked about a 3C method of planning out your branching scenarios, where you have an initial choice or initial challenge, sorry. And then from that challenge, you have 3 choices, and each choice has an associated consequence, and they can either be positive or negative. So our goals for today are to define Choose Your Own Adventure again and just review branching scenarios, generate the situation in which you might use a Choose Your Own Adventure, and then utilize Canvas and PowerPoint to build them. And I did a little bit on Canvas this morning, getting it ready to kind of show what we can do on there. So for Diane to know where this idea came from, I have a class that is heavy in teaching off guidelines that are predetermined by our overarching governing body in exercise science, the American College of Sports Medicine. And it can be a little dry and dense. And I reached a point in prepping for the class where I didn't know what I was going to do for students that were online. We do a lot of role play and hands-on stuff, and online students don't always get that opportunity, especially if they're asynchronous. So someone had suggested something along the lines of a Choose Your Own Adventure. So I started creating this tool, and now I'm using it more as practice for students before they come in and enter into role play situations. It's a little bit lower stakes. They can kind of work through the process before they're in the real world. And then they kind of knew what to ask and were more prepared for our role play situations.
Okay.
So from a pedagogy standpoint, it is branching scenarios is where Choose Your Own Adventure will come from. So it's going to provide generally industry-like scenarios. So in Kim's case, we were talking athletic training and working with an athlete that may have, you know, gone down with an injury on the field. How do we respond to that? What are the appropriate steps? For my classes, we're looking at doing intake interviews on new training clients, trying to figure out their overall disease risk, what are they doing currently for exercise, and making sure we're getting all of the information. So it allows our students to consider their consequences and then become more of an active participant, but their safety and failure. So a lot of times I was finding students would ask a question not knowing what the response would be. So in terms of asking someone how much they exercise, if you just ask someone how much they exercise, you're not getting enough information for what you as a professional would need. So it led them into seeing that if you picked this option, you were given feedback on maybe you should get a little bit more detailed and go back and pick a different option. So they were allowed to fail with feedback right away, and then being able to bring that into the classroom when we did actual role play scenarios. Some of the things that we focused on being important was relatable characters and situations, but also an opportunity for new and different situations. In my classroom, I find most of the students are active or exercising regularly. They're active, so they don't know necessarily how to deal with someone who's an older adult or a child or has a disease, or maybe in Kim's case, they're not, during their time with us, they don't come across a certain injury. So it gives opportunity for things they're going to see in the real world, but in their short time here, they may not. Planning is the most difficult and the most important part of all of this. Strong planning up front makes it easier to both generate and be successful in generating your Choose Your Own Adventure and being able to make changes when necessary. And then focus on different exploration options. And one option we also talked about was as a tool for students, maybe higher level students, creating them for younger level students as well. So Kim, I know where you want to use a choose your own adventure scenario. Do you want to update Diane a little bit on what your thoughts are?
Sure, and I've changed it a little bit from what we discussed last week to make it a little bit more hopefully streamlined for the students. And so the scenario that I'm kind of working on creating right now, we have an athletic trainer working at a marathon event or some kind of long running event. And they have an athlete cross the finish line with altered mental status. So they're confused, they're, maybe they look like they might be heading toward unconsciousness. And I want my students to work through taking a history, so to understand what might be going on with the patient, and then assessing vital signs and making kind of a determination to figure out, does this person need to be transported to the hospital via ambulance, or can they just go about their daily activities once they feel better?
Awesome. Just writing down some notes so as we work on generating them. Yeah, and I think that's kind of what can happen is you have this overarching large challenge, and sometimes that may be almost too difficult. So you need to, and too difficult, I mean for you to write out and plan. It might be better to bring it down. Diane, where do you see yourself using potentially a choose your own adventure?
Well, I teach the projects and curriculum. It's a projects class in curriculum and instruction. And I was trying to figure out, I'm familiar with Choose Your Own Adventures as an elementary teacher, where we would get commercial products, Oregon Trail being the very first one that came out, Are you familiar with that, Kim? Jessica? That maybe
the computer game?
Yeah, right.
Yes, I am. I wasn't sure if it was something else. No, I know what it is.
You come up with a certain scenario. Well, what should we do? Should we do this? Should we do that? And what happens? So I have used Choose Your Own Adventure in the elementary classroom from commercial projects. But I thought that this would be kind of fun for me just to see what this is all about, and maybe throw this out as a possibility for my graduate students to incorporate into their website that they are creating. For example, I have one student who's doing her website on social justice. And so maybe they come to a scenario, and what are your choices when you come into this situation, that kind of thing. So for me, I would like just to see how you're using Canvas and PowerPoint to do a Choose Your Own Adventure.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a prime opportunity for your students to generate their own, which is nice. Awesome. All right, so that related to plotting and workflow. And Diane, I know that the previous PowerPoint is going to go up, and the video will go up at some point where we go over this a little bit more in depth, which I think will be great tools for your students.
Okay.
Because the hardest part in generating them is keeping the decision tree straight. And it kind of depends on what works for you and finding what works for you. So I'm going to show you a little bit what I did today to generate a very small portion of my decision tree. But then I also really like the 3 C's organizational tool and color coding to be able to kind of work through it. And I have a Google Doc to this as well that will be linked, I hope, into the YouTube video so that you have that as well. If not, I can send it to you directly. And basically you have a table where you have your initial overall challenge, and then you have each subsequent challenge. And choices lead to a consequence, and those consequences can then become your new challenge. And that's where you get the branching to come across. I found that color coding these helped me follow along where I was. I think if you're making a very small Choose Your Own Adventure, this can work really well. When you have to go very large with a lot of different branches, it could be more difficult. I think if your ultimate challenge has a single outcome, so if the end is always going to be the same, this tool can work really well. The Choose Your Own Adventure I implemented in my class had multiple outcomes dependent on the path you went down. So for that one, I really liked drawing out a whole branching tree. All right, so looking at how to implement PowerPoint and Google Slides, they're very similar. Just what you're hitting might be a little different. We'll go over PowerPoint. And then we have Canvas. So within Canvas, I like to use the modules feature. It could work just using pages, but I like the modules feature more for me to keep myself organized and keep everything together. You utilize the linking option to multiple pages, and I'll go over all of that. What I really like is the incorporation of multimedia. So being able to put in specific PDFs. So in my case, if a client is filling out some sort of, health history questionnaire, when they choose this option, they may go to the health history questionnaire. And from there, they may go down a different option. Different videos. So we generate a lot of videos within our department, and being able to utilize those and have them assess the video and move on from there. And then images as well. You can also make it so they can highlight, like they can pick an image and that leads them down a route too, which is interesting. And then on Canvas, I like discussion boards at the end. So having students reflect on their process.
So can I ask a question? You're putting
Absolutely.
Choose Your Adventure in a particular module within Canvas.
I generally would make them as their own module.
Right, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. So
but within a unit,
Adventure
if that
would be
makes
the
sense.
module itself.
Yes, and let me pull up Canvas now and I'll show you what I was working with in that. All right, so this is my design toolbox and just kind of short in here. This was from last class or last session. But basically, my ultimate goal with this one is to look at a VO2 max test. So that's why I just named it VO2 start for myself. But basically, they would know that this is where they start, and you would have a welcome.
Okay.
Giving, my students have done it, so I didn't include directions because I know when they're doing Choose Your Own Adventure how it's going to work. But I think having directions of this is what you're going to do, you're going to pick options, and then setting the stage. And I think setting that stage is really important. So in this one, I was telling them you're working through an intake and initial testing, and then meeting the client. So in Kim's case, it's you're the 8-year in AT, you're working this marathon, potentially knowing about the environment. Is it hot? Is it cold? What does the course look like? Things like that, that an individual that's in that situation is going to know. So you're really setting the stage. In certain cases, you'll have to set more of a stage and provide maybe more background. And then from there, I would link, so they would just click on this page and it sends them to the next option. So in this one, they are meeting the client. He tells them a little bit and then they need to keep going from there. So what I would do here is I go into edit. I do use design tools if you use them. I think it just makes things visually pleasing. I also like the option of, in advanced elements, doing pop-up content. So say I want to just remind them of something. So maybe in this one, I want to remind them that we want to look at where he is in terms of his behavior change. I might want to highlight his activity and then either do a tooltip or a popover. And then in that, you can type into these. So over here, you can type, and let's say, where is he in the transfer model change? And just kind of give them some reminders, which is nice. And I didn't highlight activity well, but give them some nice reminders and tips, a tooltip, to show some things that they need to be thinking about, especially if this is their first one. Or in some cases, I even put images in pop-ups so that they're reminded of what they're supposed to be doing. So for example, we have something called the ACSM algorithm, which decides if someone needs medical clearance, and it's a figure. And a lot of times, if I'm working through those stages with them, at some point I will have a pop-up where it's the same little bracket just like this, but it pops up and it's the picture. So they're reminded, okay, I'm supposed to be using this tool. Now let's say I wanted to use the linking feature. You simply highlight what you're going to do, links to pages. If you haven't pre-made them, you just add a link to a new page and then you would type it. So how would you describe your current activity? And then just hit insert link. And that's going to generate that page for you.
Oh, okay.
And that's what's nice is you don't have to pre-make them all. So if I did that with all 3, I hit save. Now I click on this link. It's going to come and say this page doesn't exist, but it's going to create it.
Right.
And now I'm following my own path. So let me pull up the other thing I wanted to pull up to show with that. I restarted my computer and everything. It's no longer up. So here was kind of my intro and directions. This is a brief tree of what I would be doing. I'm like our students, I use Notability to write it out because it has a large array of colors, so I can kind of help myself. But basically I was going to start with that intro and directions page, and then I was going to meet the client. When I'm doing this in creating one for class, I'll add more notes into this. So I'll give, their age, the background information, all the important stuff will kind of be in here. And then these are my 3 options. Have the individual describe their activity, ask them, are you active? How often do you participate in activity? And then I know where are those branching to.
Mm-hmm.
So in the case of just asking, are you active? That would be that safety and failure moment for these students. And it was going to lead them back saying, maybe when I click on that page, it says, this is an okay option, but you're not getting all the information you could have. You may not get an actual idea of someone is truly active to the level we're looking. Remember that we define physical activity as the 3-3-3 rule. And just by asking this, we have no idea whether or not they're meeting that.
No, because you're just getting a yes or no answer. But in the others, you are asking for more feedback.
Right, exactly. And that's what I like about this, because their first inclination in any role play or any scenarios, just say, are you active? Mm-hmm. And if someone says yes, they go, great. And then we do a role play situation in class where we find out that that person's activity is 1 day a week of walking, which doesn't meet our guidelines. So this gave them the opportunity to learn that using and asking that question that you kind of are primed to ask in life won't give you your information. And it gives them the moment to then go back and then choose one of these. So with that, I usually just put in a back button. So let's say well, that was a good one. So let's go back. We'll make the changes. So when we said the second one, do you consider yourself to be an active individual? We'll create a new page. Save. And when I do this, what I would do is create some sort of, give my feedback. I probably keep the same design as I move forward. Feedback of why I don't want to do this. And then return 1 step. And you can even put like an image. If you, in my PowerPoint, I put like an actual back button, return 1 step, and then you would link it back to, and this is where your planning would help. I know where I need to go back to. So when I'm looking at, where'd it go? When I'm looking at this one, I know I need to go back to meeting your client. Because when you get farther down and farther branched, you'll find that you can get a little lost on where you are. So this is why this tool helps, like, okay, this one, I'm going back to meeting the client. That's where they're moving back to. So then we would just link back to meet your client. And then they would return 1 step. And then they would know that that's not the best option. So now they're down to 2 and they can move on from there. Mm-hmm. Questions so far on Canvas? Mm-hmm. Kim, is that what you were thinking of generally doing?
Yeah, I I liked seeing you go through the process. I always forget that you can create a new page directly in that menu. I
Yeah.
think I probably would have tried to create them all up front and made myself angry. So I appreciate seeing that.
So you can do that. That is an option. I've definitely done that before. One thing I generally like to do is kind of like on this one, I would probably generate all 3 pages in here, like link them all at once, and then go back and add the information that's needed on each of those pages. Or sometimes if I just want to start with this one and I know that this one's going to have 2 options, I'll keep following this path until it gets to where I have meeting points. So for example, pull this up again. Here, we're talking about similar, we're getting to the same point, but just a little differently. So our end point might be that we know that he runs 2 times a week, his heart rate increases significantly, and he runs for anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes. So at some point down here, I might have a point where they converge together. And I'll probably build to a point of convergence or the end of one line. And it sounds like in what you're planning to do, you'll probably have that point where everything converges. And then it lets you keep track. And then generally what I do is I will literally come through and I will check off that I've made this page and I have the links. And you have to be very on top of yourself to be able to check everything off and follow the proper order, or else you can get a little lost. And do you guys know how to embed images and videos and all of that? Okay. Yeah, and I like that option of adding something other than just text for them to look at, even if it's, a picture of the client, or if you can get a video to collect, in my case, it's data, or a situation, and then how are we responding from that situation. All right. Comfortable with Canvas and creating them?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then I just like to keep them under a module, just like this. And then I did it on this one. Indenting based on, like, I know that all of these are the 2 options under this choice. So these end up having consequences. And sometimes that consequence is leading to more challenges, or in the case of just asking, are you active? The consequence was, you didn't gain enough information. You should probably try something different.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then in PowerPoint, I'll just leave it like this for now. Again, you can build the outline first in PowerPoint, similar to what Kim was saying in Canvas, maybe building all the pages and adding in the detail. PowerPoint is how I did it, and I will say it was time consuming. I think Canvas is a little easier now that I've done that, and probably would be what I would do moving forward. Just because PowerPoint is a lot harder and a lot more tedious. So you have to link within the current presentation. So you highlight the sentence that you want and you go into insert and you insert a hyperlink. And then you have to go within this document and you pick the slide title. One of the reasons I suggest building out maybe the whole shell outline first, knowing that you're going to move, is that if you kind of go in and adding as you're going, these numbers might change. So you have to be very cognizant of
The title.
Otherwise, you don't know where you're going.
Right.
So one thing, like we'll link this right back to that. Then you pick the slide. So this is the Choose Your Own Adventure I did for my course. They had their directions and then they got to pick 2, and I was able to link the person. So they got to click on the 2 different stick figures, which was kind of fun. And when we start with like the first client, there were times where as I was building through this one, we have 2, because from 2 different paths, they got the same question, but to link them, I had the same thing. Or you might ask the question and get a different response. And this is when you're building it out, and I tried to link everything as I was going. And I found that I was like, I don't remember which one this is supposed to go to. I don't remember what information they had beforehand. Versus if you kind of build your shell, what you said in Canvas might be a little frustrating, but maybe it's not as frustrating to make because you're just making title slides. I could write down next to it, like, okay, this is slide 12, this is slide 13, this is slide 14. And when I went to link, it was really easy because I could just confirm it with the title, but know that I was on the general right path. And the same thing for linking images, you do the same thing, the insert hyperlink, and it links to that image. Questions on, that's how PowerPoint generally works. It's not that difficult.
No.
In terms of doing it compared to Canvas, I think is just more user-friendly.
Are you guys familiar with HyperStudio?
I'm not.
You didn't have that when you guys were in elementary school? Okay. Middle school. It is HyperStudio. I liked a little bit better than PowerPoint. HyperStudio came out after PowerPoint came out. And it allows you to, instead of doing linear, like a PowerPoint, you have slide 1, slide 2, slide 3, that's linear progression. HyperStudio allows you to create within your stacks a main page, a home page, and then you can do the branching off. And so when we did Journey Through the Solar System with my 4th graders, I had them use index cards so that they could plan it all out and lay it out on a table. So let's say they went from the home page to Mars, and then from Mars they went to Jupiter, but they could actually see it and lay out their index cards as to how they wanted their progression of their journey through the solar system to work. So looking at this, I'm thinking that if you wanted to use PowerPoint, you might want to try just getting some good old-fashioned index cards and just writing out some key words or phrases on each one, and then laying it out so you can see, like if we go from slide 1, which is your starting point, and you choose on slide 1A, that might take you to slide 9. You could lay it all out, and we used some yarn or some string to link them. I mean, it just helped the kids understand how to lay out a choose your own adventure.
I think that's a great idea, especially if you're using this in terms of a tool for your students to generate.
Yes.
Because it also allows you to kind of come in and double check everything.
Mm-hmm.
Because it can be
well, you get lost.
Difficult to remember.
Yeah,
you do. You get lost. And that's why planning and the plotting is so important.
Right.
And I do like that idea of plotting out with actual cards or even like sticky notes, something where they can follow that. I never thought of that. That's a really good idea.
Well, we were working with 10-year-olds and we had to do that. But, you know, adults can use it too, I think. Yeah.
I could see in class, like that'd be an awesome activity of, you know, a semester-long project where we start in class and they're building their cards throughout the weeks, and then the end, they're end up actually creating the PowerPoint for you.
Well, what we did is we partnered the kids, and it helped each of them keep on track. And I do like the sticky note part because that would just be easy. Give them a big poster board and sticky note.
Yeah.
And that way they can switch them around, you know. So I'm thinking like in your classes, if you ever wanted to turn this around and have your students create them, you know, pair them up and have
that
them
is something we talked about last week, is that option.
Right.
Because a lot of times I think it's used more in an English class setting as a writing tool,
Right.
From the research that I read. But I would be really interested in kind of seeing what is your student's thought process through a situation without you guiding it.
Well, in education, we call that formative assessment. So what you're doing is you're looking at the students as they're going through the thinking process and planning and working together. But you as an instructor are now just taking notes on their behaviors, of their interactions and what they actually see. And that gives you it's a way of assessing what they really know and understand, and how, most importantly, how they can apply that knowledge.
Yeah. And then the nice thing is you now have a bunch of choose your own adventures done, where you can use them in other classes, because I will admit that my original goal was to have 3 clients and 74 slides for 2. I quit and said 2 is good, and we'll do more role plays in class.
Right. Yeah.
Because thankfully this was early on in the semester and I had no students completely asynchronous, so they used it to prep themselves prior to class.
Right.
Or some said that they used it after, once they had the in-class experience, to practice, whether it's for lab work or the exam.
Well, we found that we just learned so much about what the kids understood about the solar system that we would not have gotten with a paper and pencil test, you know.
Absolutely. Well, and you just don't have time to kind of ask everything in a paper and pencil test, and this gives you a little bit more opportunity.
Well, it also gave us an opportunity to say to the kids that they have to do some research skills. If you want your astronauts to go to Mars, what are they going to find? Oh, well, I guess we better look that up. You know, so yeah.
Yeah, you want it to be realistic.
Exactly.
Then the other thing I really like to add in more on Canvas, and then with PowerPoint, we did an in-class discussion, was reflecting on the whole process. And I think especially if your students are generating it themselves, because they may come to roadblocks that they didn't think that existed, but now they're doing it and learning that this happens.
Right.
So asking them to look overall at the process and what was their end result. And I think that's important depending on how many different avenues you go down. You have to be careful because there can be a lot. I think in my first client, I had about 4 or 5 different endings. He took a little bit more work than the second client, who only had about 2 because it was longer. So knowing people saying, well, I found that he needed this, and someone else saying, well, I found that he needed this, and going through, well, how did you get there? Let's go through where you guys are different and see how you ended up at 2 different results.
Right.
What did they learn in the process? So a lot of my students reflected saying, I never knew how to ask these questions. I just assumed people knew what I was talking about, because they have the education. And when you're working with the general population, if you say, are you exercising at moderate intensity? They don't know what that means.
Right.
And then they come into role play situations knowing when they're taking on the role of a client to not just say yes because they know what it means. And then where can you improve moving forward? And I got a lot of great reflection from the students saying, moving forward, I'm going to be able to take this skill into students that are working now or they're interning now, and then being able to practice what they learned both in the choose your own adventure and then the follow-up role play into working with their actual clients and patients. And then I always suggest trying it again. So have them either trying with the second person or going through again and choosing different options and see where it leads them. Because if theoretically you could have a student who picks everything correct, that's why I suggest having them try it again. Say, okay, pick different options, because then they also still get those opportunities for correction.
Yeah.
Because maybe they just got lucky. Maybe they kind of saw where it was going, but being able to look at those different plot points. So I always say, go back and try it again and try to pick something different. Do you guys have other questions or comments on building these? Or
Well, I like what you just said, make them pick different options. But then I think you would want to say, when you do pick this option, what thoughts do you have of what would happen next? Capture maybe their thoughts at that point, and then let's move on and see what happens next.
That makes me think it would be, in my classes, we do case studies a lot. And I do ask them that. And now I'm thinking maybe if we did a case study in a choose your own adventure format,
Right.
where we can kind of all together interact, and as they're making decisions, they can reflect and we can almost have like a debate on the decision in class.
Right. Exactly.
Kim, any thoughts, questions? How are you feeling about potentially creating one?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about that. And I kind of like the, if and when my students are ever face-to-face full-time again, being able to do this as a group activity, almost to get their feet wet and get them used to the idea, and then have them work through case studies on their own and maybe eventually even create them for other students. So I like how this is tying together. It makes a lot of sense.
Kim, couldn't your students who are doing this, just doing DL, work with a partner who's, doing distance learning as well, and create a product together and then show the class?
Yeah, they certainly could.
My students are all distance learning and they're all creating websites, but they're working in what we call critical friend groups, where they are giving feedback and suggestions to one another. And it's working out pretty well.
Yeah, I think it could work. I don't plan to incorporate this choose your own adventure in the fall, and probably not even in the spring. I don't know that it fits my courses. They don't really fit this. So I'm thinking ahead to summer, and just kind of knowing what our schedule looks like and things like that. But you're right. We certainly could have them either work independently or, set up a Zoom meeting and do breakout rooms and have them,
right,
work together.
That's what I've been doing for case study days. And I would like to incorporate this in that this class is flipped. So Tuesdays we're more reviewing the concept and applying it all together. And then Thursdays they do the case study more on their own. So Tuesday, I'm thinking this would have been, I wish I had thought of using it more throughout the semester, now that having these conversations, to kind of work through it as the class. And then on Tuesdays, what I do is, or Thursdays, I gave the option at first and no one took advantage of it. And then as we moved through the semester, they did, and they've been really successful. Because of our current situation, my class has 25 students. My classroom holds 12. So I can't have them all there, but I only have 6 groups. So they all have at least one representative come in class and work on and they're all in their Zoom meetings, and they bring headphones so that it's not that distracting. And then when they come into roadblocks and questions, they're able to interact with me, and I'm allowed to be in person. And that's been really successful. And I think even incorporating this choose your own adventure, the class period before, and working through it all together, even if people are in class and on Zoom, would be really successful.
right.
That's something to think about, Kim, if you're looking at not everyone being in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Any other questions, thoughts?
Well, just for to explain why I think this is very valuable, one of the concepts that I'm hammering down with my students is universal design for learning, which gives learners opportunities to be active learners. And so this is an example of active learning. Instead of just passively looking at a PowerPoint, now you're interacting with the PowerPoint, making choices, and then having to make a decision and then make a response on that. So from a instructional point of view, I think this is a really good example of universal design for learning, the principle of engaging learners in an active process.
Yeah, it's been really successful in my course. I would say that the times we've used it, because the class is buildable, so everything we do from week 1 we've done every week, and this was one of the things we did week 1. They've been much part of it because they've been doing it so long, but even from the beginning they were grasping this concept and what they need to do at a higher success rate than I think normal, because they had this opportunity right away to become active with it.
Did you say this PowerPoint would be available to us so we can look through it all?
Yeah, I can make it available. So the meetings are all being recorded and shared for the TL YouTube page. And then I've given them access to the Google Drive with my, the 3Cs organizational tool as well. And then I'm happy to email both of these to you as well.
Okay. I'm just dpainter@su.edu.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, that's all I have prepped for today with only 2 participants, but I appreciate you being active participants. And then
Well, take your time.
I'm open to any questions. My email is jsudak, my maiden name, @su.edu.
Okay.
So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and I'm more than happy to help.